Hello and welcome to this review of my Razer BlackWidow Ultimate. This was a donation from a viewer, and I'm sure many of you are glad to see it, because if I had a penny for every time someone requested a Razer review, I could have actually bought one. The owner got fed up with this and switched back to a rubber dome board, which, let's be honest, doesn't bode well, but he was gracious enough to donate it for review, so thanks, mate. Now, this particular board was bought in 2012, making it one of the older models, and in fact I think it might be the very first generation of BlackWidow Ultimate. Since then, this thing has had a whole bunch of different revisions, so keep in mind that this review doesn't cover all BlackWidow Ultimates, as they varied over the years. At the time, it cost the owner €127.40, which is a very tidy sum, especially then. I mean, back then, mechanical keyboards weren't really in again yet like they are now, so this was when all the mechanical keyboards like Kish Savers went for just a few dollars, while nowadays they go for a small fortune. This model was one of the first, if not the first, of the gaming keyboards, which is a fancy term for light show. Now, this is a typical Razer maneuver, whose company policy is to basically uglify an existing product and then stick a giant price tag on it. Somewhat surprisingly, however, the current sales page of the BlackWidow Ultimate doesn't serve up the usual gamer bullshit, you know, the generic rollover this, actuation that, ghosting, response time, and input lag, blah blah, and all that other crap that's basically all over everything that looks ugly and or has backlighting nowadays. Instead, they pitch it mostly as a ruggedized keyboard with a higher switch lifetime of 80 million keystrokes, dust and water resistance, and tough construction. Now, I'm not going to water test this, because if even a waterproofed Hall effect keyboard won't work underwater, I'm pretty sure this thing won't either, and testing switch lifetimes is beyond my capabilities, but I can at least comment on the build quality, and the fact that that's what they're going for I can actually appreciate, because that's a pretty non-BS selling point, which is a considerable rarity for a gaming keyboard. Now, I've gone over the construction, and to my surprise, it was actually pretty good. The thing weighs about 1,350 grams, just under the weight of a Dell Bigfoot, and it feels pretty damn taut and well built. It includes a metal mounting plate and a tough and roomy plastic case with wide bezels, which is somewhat uncharacteristic of modern keyboards, actually. I had wanted to show you more about the insides of the keyboard, but it suffers from a disability that many keyboards have nowadays. The screws are hidden behind the rubber pads at the bottom, which is a pain in the ass to begin with, because you have to peel them off to open it. And then when you reattach the pads, they're not on quite as well as they were before. So opening it requires permanently damaging the keyboard. But not just that, even when you do remove all the screws at the bottom, there's two more hidden behind these two plastic things, by the way, there are still screws holding it together somewhere, presumably on the inside. Now, I've seen this many times with modern keyboards, where it's excessively hard to open them up, especially without damaging the keyboard somehow, and it's a pretty damn terrible anti-feature in my opinion. On the other hand, one thing where they actually went slightly overboard with build quality is in the cable, actually. Now, it's a really tough son of a gun, very thick and braided as well, so I'm sure it can withstand a lot of punishment, but the material's really stiff and it's hard to bend, so bad that it can push stuff off of your desk, or even lift up the whole keyboard if it's at an angle it doesn't like. Personally, I prefer the good old coiled cable, which is much more pliable and doesn't have this problem. Another weird thing is that while it's advertised as a gaming keyboard, it doesn't use diodes, so it only has 2-key rollover, which is otherwise considered a big no-go by many gamers. See, if I press and hold Q and W, and then press 8, the 8 key won't register, whereas it registers fine without the other 2 keys pressed. There's a couple of other combinations I've found that do this as well, but, truth be told, there's not that many that I could find easily. The way they've gone around these limitations is by using what's known as a gaming optimized matrix, in which the keys around the WASD cluster are all on different channels, so they don't conflict with each other, and I think they might have used more channels in total as well. Later models did include some diodes to achieve 6-key rollover, and later 10-key rollover. Many keyboards nowadays sport full N-key rollover, but unless you are either a polydactylic or an alien life form, you can't realistically need more than 10-key rollover anyway. It also comes with a USB pass-through, as well as one for a microphone and one for a headset plug. These can actually be pretty useful features even outside of gaming, so it's nice to see them included, but I should mention that you do need a spare USB port, so it doesn't actually increase the number of USB ports on your system. Other features include a layer of media shortcuts over the F keys, as well as a gaming lock, which are fairly standard nowadays, but slightly more uncommonly, it also features 5 separate macro buttons on the left. Now, a fair number of high-end keyboards do actually sport macro buttons or even full programmability, but many of the cheaper keyboards don't, so this is one of the features that sets it apart. The macros can be programmed on the fly by using Fn plus Alt, like this, but it just makes the macro light flash on this one, and it doesn't actually do anything, so I think it's either broken on this one or it doesn't work the way it says in the manual I found. The macro keys being on the left actually vaguely reminds me of the old AT and XT layouts which had the function keys on the left, and for some reason they seem to have shifted the F keys to the right a little bit, but otherwise it's a standard layout, although this one is a German model. The switches are Cherry MX Blue, about which I've already mentioned several times what I think, so I won't need to go into too much detail, but I did find 3 things with the ones in this keyboard that I think are of note. First of all, at some point in 2014, they switched away from using these in favor of a series of custom Cherry MX clones called Razer switches, which were based on the Kale PG1511 series of switches manufactured by Kaihua and nowadays also Greetech, and if I get aboard with these in someday, I'll talk about those in more detail. Apparently on non-RGB models, they've switched back to genuine Cherry MX though. It's these Razer switches that are the cause of the advertised 80 million cycle lifetime, as Cherry MX have the more common 50 million cycle lifetime instead. The second is that the switches in this keyboard, for some reason, are in very bad condition. The 9 key barely works at all, and when it does, it chatters, and several of the other keys also chatter. I've even noticed ghosting issues when pressing multiple keys, as in actual ghosting issues, which means that a key that is not being pressed registers as being pressed. This sort of reliability issue is not generally a problem with Cherry MX switches, which are actually fairly rugged, so I'm a bit surprised about that, but according to the previous owner, nothing particularly special happened to this keyboard that could cause that. Third, I know I've mentioned several times already that I'm not a fan of the sound of these switches, but they sound exceptionally horrendous in this particular chassis. This is the Cherry G80 3000 LSMGB, an extremely bog standard board that I must have had a dozen of over the years, and I often use it as a benchmark to show the sound of MX Blues, but this Razer keyboard sounds much worse. It's not quite as ear-shatteringly awful as most of those Chinese clone switches, which are often put in keyboards with an open case design as well, but it's getting there. Razer model names are essentially a combination of ridiculous buzzwords that are at best only vaguely, or at worst not at all related to their actual functionality, but from what I've gathered, the BlackWidow Ultimate is the basic version. Now, why they would name the basic version Ultimate, I'm not sure, but I guess it's just marketing and whatever, people bought it so it worked. The Ultimate features a full-size layout, monochrome backlighting, blue in this case, they later switched to green, and clicky switches. The look is something only a gamer or a mother could love. The shape of the case is almost conservative for a Razer product though, and the monochrome-only backlighting again isn't as garish as you'd expect of Razer, although it would have looked like Christmas when it first came out, but the really big offender here is the font on the keycaps. I mean, what the fuck is this bullshit? It looks completely ridiculous. It's so bad that it actually interferes with legibility. I mean, what the fuck is this letter here? What the fuck is it? Speaking of which, the keycaps are probably the board's weakest point. Apart from being spit ugly, the legends use laser-ablated printing on thin ABS, which is rather cheap. I should mention that most modern caps like this tend to make fingerprints really stand out, but it's not that bad on this one. Also, the lifetime of laser-ablated legends like this varies a bit, but it can range from just a few years to mere months, which is ridiculous. What happens in those cases is that not the lettering, but the paint around them wears off, so the letter becomes a big blob of see-through plastic. Another example of ugly fonts is this little light here. What the hell is that? Oh, wait, it's a lock light, now I see. So that hooked thing is supposed to represent a capital letter C, I guess? That utterly gnarly piece of work is a number 1, I think, and that thing on the end is an S for scroll lock? Overall, this keyboard is actually not as bad to use as it looks. I mean, at least personally, I'm not a big fan of the styling, and the keycaps are pretty disappointing, but it's otherwise not that bad of a keyboard. It's got lots of extra features, most of which are pretty common on A-brand keyboards nowadays, but it is a tad on the expensive side. Most Chinese clone boards don't sport macro keys or some of the other more specialized features, and they're probably not as well built, but they are several times cheaper, and for me at least, it's hard to justify such a big price difference considering what you get extra for it. In fact, it's also expensive enough that you have to really want it for the backlighting or some of the other extra gaming features, because if you just want a well-bought keyboard for typing, you can easily buy a Model M for less money and get a keyboard that's much better in almost every way, especially if you are actually looking for a ruggedized keyboard. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.